have you ever considered why less and less men are settling down? And this isn't just an observation. There are actual statistics to back this, which we'll get into later. In this video, I'm going to share why in some parts of the world, men are waiting longer and longer to settle down, while in other places, they're actually settling down much quicker. There is a science behind this, and I'm going to explain exactly why this is the case and what you can do to ensure you can attract a high-value masculine man to become your husband no matter where you are living. No, I'm not going to ask you to pack your bags necessarily, but I am going to give you some tips that can help you based on where you're located. So before we get into the statistics, I just want to cover some bases. The dating market is an economy, and the best way to view an economy is by looking at supply and demand. As the supply of something goes down, whether it's food, whether it's a luxury good, whether it's a service, the demand for that goes up. And this is because as humans, we are biologically wired to want the thing that we can't have. And this explains why prices go up, why the cost of eggs, for example, would go up when there is an egg shortage. It's because there are less eggs that are in supply, and so therefore the small amount of eggs that are in supply are going to have a higher price target because they know that people are willing to pay more because there is less availability. So you can apply the same principle when you look at certain designer brands and how they can really hack your psychology and tell you that, hey, this product is worth X amount of dollars, and it's because we only make 3 of them per year. You can see this with limited edition sports cars, or even with paintings where it's a one-of-one piece. That's always going to drive the price of something up. Now, if you think about dating is also a market, and people really don't like when you talk about dating in this sense, but the reason it is a market is because there is a limited number of humans on Earth. And to get more specific, there's going to be a certain number of men and women in a certain location, and the actual ratio of how many men and women there are is going to dictate if dating, settling down, and marriage is more difficult or easy in that area. So for the sake of this video, we are going to be viewing dating from the lens of supply and demand. So let's get into the global gender statistics. So there is something called the sex ratio. And the sex ratio is basically just a fancy way of saying the number of men to women in a specific area. Okay, so I am going to throw up a map on the screen, and this map has a visual gradient of different shades of the color pink. And I really love this because it can help you visualize gender statistics and how they vary across the world. So in this map, the countries in lighter, paler shades of pink have a low sex ratio. What does that mean? It means that there are less men than women. On the other hand, the countries that are in a darker shade of pink have a high sex ratio, meaning that there are more men than women. So let's take a closer look at the countries to see which ones have the biggest gap and discrepancy in men versus women. Okay, so these are going to be the countries that are in the lightest shades of pink, as well as the countries with the highest shades of pink. And what these countries have in common is that there's a big gap of difference in the number of men versus women. So either that means there's a lot more men than women, or there's a lot more women than men. So there isn't a equal distribution of men and women. Okay, so first let's start with countries with the lowest sex ratios. As I said before, that means that there are fewer men than women. So these countries include Armenia, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Belarus, Hong Kong, and Ukraine. In these countries, Because there are fewer men than women, men are higher in demand. So let's go back to the supply and demand concept. Because there are fewer men, the demand for those men is much higher because there aren't that many of them, right? So what happens in these countries is there is much more competition among women. This is because there is simply not enough men to couple up with. If every man was with a woman, there would be a bunch of women left out of the equation. Now let's look at the opposite, which are countries with the highest sex ratios. This means that there are much more men than women in these countries. So some of these countries include Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. What one thing do you have in common with these? They're mainly Middle Eastern countries. So in these countries, because there are fewer women, women are much more in demand. This means that there is more competition among men to settle down and marry women because there's simply not enough women to couple up with. So in these countries, if every man married every woman, there would still be a bunch of men left over who were single and who could not mate. An interesting thing is, have you kind of noticed how these are the countries that have something called polygamy? And this is where one man marries multiple women. This is because in places like Qatar, there are 2.6 men for every one woman. So now let's look at California. And why I'm interested in California is I spent most of my life there. I lived in California for over 20 years, the majority of my life. I moved there when I was about 5 years old. And one thing that I noticed in California was that a lot of women had trouble dating, especially in big cities like LA. And I was always curious as to why do so many women struggle to date when there are so many beautiful women, so many educated women, but it seems like a lot of them are single. So I did some research and I figured out what California's sex ratio was. So California has quite a balanced distribution of men and women. In essence, the ratio seems fairly equal. There are only 99.8 men for every 100 women. So when you look at that number, you think, oh, there's literally only a 0.2 difference. This must not really make a big impact. So I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking, competition is probably equal here because men and women both have an equal shot of finding love. However, the population of California in July of 2024 was 39 million. So if we do the math on this, we would find out that there are 31,000 more women than there are men. So even with a sex ratio that is almost purely equal, we are looking at thousands of women who will simply end up single. Even if every single man married every single woman, there would be thousands of women left over without a mate. This is staggering and it's literally bonkers. And when I did the math on this, I was honestly shocked. And it made sense why there is so much competition in California. So many women are competing to look their best, to be their most fit self. You see women doing crazy beauty treatments, whether it be facials, Botox, fillers. You see women getting their hair done, their nails done, sometimes on a weekly or monthly basis. And these women, even though they're healthy, they're smart, they're fit, they are still struggling to find and meet men. And it just added up. Once I did the research for this video, it dawned on me. There will be 31,000 women at least who don't end up with a man simply because there are not enough men to go around. This example highlights how even a small disparity in the sex ratio can have huge implications. So now I want to talk more about what the implications are of countries that have low sex ratio versus countries that have a high sex ratio. I already touched on this, but I want to go a bit deeper. So in countries where there is a low sex ratio, there is more women than men. This means that women are going to have a higher competition among them to secure men. Men, on the other hand, have more choices and more dating power. So they can take their time. They can settle down in their 30s or 40s. They know that there is plenty of women available for them. So they don't need to settle down in their 20s. They could wait till their 30s or their 40s. And they are not competing among one another because they know that they are the ones that are in demand. Okay, so in these countries, there are going to be delays in marriage for men because they feel no urgency and no competition. In these regions, men are going to be much more selective of their mating partners, and they may even feel choice paralysis because there's so many women that it's hard to just choose one. Now, in countries where there is a high sex ratio, there is a scarcity of women. This means that there is high competition among the men, and the men are really doing their best to wow women, to spoil them, to really show that they are the right man for them. So in these countries, women enjoy more dating power, they can be more selective, and feel empowered to take their time. So women might actually delay marriages in these countries because they know there are so many men. If I don't meet a man today, I will meet one next year or even 10 years from now. And they know that because there are so many men, they have more options. They don't need to settle down with the first man they date. They can actually figure out what the best option is for them. So what can we do about this? The first thing that I'm going to recommend, which isn't going to come as a surprise, is to widen your pool geographically. And the best way that you can do this beyond getting on a plane and traveling is to download a elite dating app. I will have the link down in the description for Millionaire Match, which is one of the most reputable elite dating apps that I have used, and it's free to join, so definitely check it out. You can find matches from all over the world there, and this is really just going to widen your opportunities for meeting someone, even if he doesn't live in the same state or country as you. One thing that is pretty awesome is that when you leverage dating apps, you balance the gender ratio because you are now talking to and potentially meeting with men from all over the world, which will in essence balance out any low or high sex ratio regions, since now the world is your oyster and you can basically talk to anyone from any region. The next thing that I recommend is to use the 80-20 principle when dating. I'm not going to get into this. I have a whole video where I talk about that, so check that out up here. The next tip is to figure out if you currently live in a low or high sex ratio environment. If you are a woman and you currently live in a low sex ratio region, then start dating young. I would recommend dating right in college or right after you graduated. This is going to ensure that you actually have opportunities for men and that the men that you desire and want to attract are not already all settled down. And last but not least is even within your country, figure out which regions give you an advantage. So I went and did some research on California, and I found that there are actually cities in California that have a high sex ratio, meaning there's going to be more competition among men and less among women. So an example of this is San Francisco, which I was actually surprised by because it is a pretty populated city. In San Francisco, there are 104 men for every 100 women. So that means if you are a woman, you technically have the advantage in a place like San Francisco, okay? So just to recap, when there is a shortage of men are going to be in supply. So that means women are going to be competing for men. Women are going to be doing a lot more effort, a lot more beauty treatments, and they are going to view other women as competition because there is simply just a shortage of men and they are in high demand. On the other hand, if there is an oversupply of men, then women are actually going to be having the upper hand, and it is going to be men who need to compete and settle down more quickly because there are not enough women to go around, and the women are the ones that are short in supply and high demand. So just keep in mind, if you are in a region with a low sex ratio, that can explain why men are not settling down and why they experience choice paralysis when it comes to marriage. You can increase your dating and marriage odds by finding out the sex ratio where you live and figuring out if there are any nearby cities or states that have a sex ratio that actually is favorable to your gender, okay? So I'm so curious to hear from you guys. I want you to comment down below where you live, where you are tuning in from, and what the sex ratio is in that region, okay? May the odds always be in your favor. And just realize, I mean, these videos are educational, they're informative, but they're not meant to in any way make you feel hopeless or disempowered. They are just meant to spread awareness so that we can figure out, hey, maybe I live in a place where I don't have many options when it comes to mates, and perhaps moving or just downloading a dating app can really help me widen my search and allow me to attract men who may feel more competition to attract me. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. Excited to hear from you guys in the comments. I will see you all very soon. Bye.